Hello, welcome to further exploration of EB5 and the future of the Regional Center Program. I'm delighted to be in CMB's executive offices in Dallas, Texas, with Matt Hogan. Matt, we've spoken before, but can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody who's joined us today. Again, I'm Matt Hogan, Vice President of Project Development for CMB Regional Centers. CMB is one of the largest active regional centers in the industry and one of the oldest regional centers. We were originally designated back in 1997. So we've been through a lot of the ups and downs in the industry. We've seen the industry evolve over time, and we're still staying tuned, and we're an active participant in making sure that this program gets reauthorized because we have a lot of faith in the program moving forward. So I'm glad to be able to be here today and talk to you a little bit more about that.
So Matt, what exactly is the status of the EB5? Well, let's be clear to begin with, right? Yeah. Perhaps it's worth explaining because people get very confused. What is it? Some EB5 is still active and can still be filed, and some EB5 is on hold. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So EB5 is permanent law. It was enacted in 1990 by the Immigration and National Naturalization Act. And the base part of the program that is still active today is the direct EB5 program. And so that requires that you make a direct investment into a business that you own and control, that business, that new commercial enterprise, directly employ physical employees that will be working on staff, on site for that business. Those jobs have to be created and last for at least 2 years. And evidence of proof that those jobs have been created is pretty rigorous. It means that you have to be able to provide I-9s, W-2s, citizenship papers to prove that those were lawful American jobs and that those jobs lasted for at least 2 years. So it's a little bit more of a, the investor themselves has to be a little bit more hands-on in most situations. It's a little bit more rigorous program, but that part of the program is permanent law. It's still active today. The regional center component that was added a little bit later, and it was added as a pilot program just to test it out to see if it was something that could help expand this program and drive more foreign investment into the United States, is called the Regional Center Program. And that is the program that we're talking about that has recently lapsed. It lapsed back in June of this year, June 30th of this year. And right now there is an ongoing effort, as I mentioned, to either come up with new legislation or work towards improving legislation that has been presented to Congress to get that program back up and running. I should say that the Regional Center Program over the years has been the most popular investment program.
Why is that? Why is it the most unpopular?
Yeah, it's the most popular, and when I say most popular, 99+% of all petitions filed for EB5 have used that Regional Center Program over the years. And the reason why it's the most popular is because it allows for a bit more of a passive investment. It's not truly passive, but typically what happens in the Regional Center Program is the investor invests into a new business. They're pooled with many other investors, sometimes from many different countries around the world. And that investment is usually either loaned or provided as equity, most typically to a real estate construction project. And why people like that program is because the job creation can be done a little bit differently. The Regional Center Program allows for jobs to be counted using economic modeling tools.
Why do we care about job creation?
We care about job creation because that's what EB5 is all about. I always say this when I speak about the program. The program to the foreign national is an immigration vehicle, but to the US government, they are more concerned about that creating jobs in the United States. It's a job creation program.
Okay.
Yep. And when I'll go back just a second. When I talked about the job creation under the Regional Center Program, it allows for a little bit more of predictability in the program. We can look at a project ahead of time, know how much spending is going to occur, and apply certain models to forecast the overall job creation. We provide those inputs to that model to the US government, and that supports the job creation that the investors will need to rely on.
Great. Okay. So fast forward, then we've got a program in place that has a less advantageous job creation model. And then we've got the Regional Center Program, what you're saying, which is currently suspended. So what happened and what's the current status of the efforts to bring that Regional Center Program back?
Yeah, so what happened is a story that really starts years ago. In 2015, and really even before 2015, lawmakers were talking about ways in which the program needed to be improved. They wanted to add certain integrity measures to the program. back in those days, they wanted to use a new law to increase the investment amount from 500,000, which by the way was the investment amount when the program started all the way back in the early 90s. It hadn't changed. And lawmakers had said, hey, we got to tighten up this program. We have to put in integrity measures to root out bad actors and fraud from happening that can hurt the investors and make a bad name for the program. We have to make sure that the money is truly driven into areas of need. And we got to make sure that the price makes sense. EB5 historically has been one of the cheapest immigration by investment programs throughout the world. There's a lot of other countries with similar programs, but EB5 has always been, because it hadn't been adjusted, had remained one of the cheapest programs. And so really what happened is over the years, there was constant debate on how the program should be changed. And year after year, the industry and the lawmakers couldn't reach consensus on the best ways to change that program. And so year after year, the program kept getting short-term extensions. The end of 2020, Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy, who have constantly been the biggest proponents for change in the program, actually decoupled the program from its typical sunset date, which was usually September 30th of each year. And they changed it until June 30th. The reason why they did that is they wanted to force real change from occurring. With that September 30th date that they had, it was very easy for the program to just be attached to budget resolutions or continuing resolutions where they could just kick the can down the road and keep the program as is. But this year they wanted to make sure real change could occur. They put it out into June 30th. Because it didn't have that obvious vehicle, the budget resolution or the continuing resolution, it was going to need standalone legislation, or it was going to need to be attached to something in order to be reauthorized. And unfortunately, that wasn't able to occur. And consensus hasn't been able to be reached on the best ways to change the program moving forward. And so that's led us to where we are
Matt,
today.
when you say that consensus hasn't been reached, let's try and understand that a little bit more. So we're going to ask you in a minute about when you think reauthorization will happen.
Sure.
But what you're saying is part of that process is some kind of political negotiation going on in the background?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who are the parties involved and sort of what's the status?
Yeah, so what I would tell you is that there's two big, very influential stakeholder organizations that work behind the scenes in EB5. And I shouldn't say behind the scenes, they're very vocal about how they'd like to see the program adjusted moving forward. And those two stakeholder organizations are IIUSA, Invest in the USA, and the EB5 Investor Coalition, a lot of times just called EB5IC. And typically what we've seen is...
Who are those? Are they associations of regional centers or investors, or who are they?
So they're made up by multiple different groups. So IIUSA is lawyers, it's regional centers, it's investors, it's people who have any sort of vested interest in the program. It could be business plan writers, people who provide other services for the industry. Same thing with EB5 Investor Coalition. Now, what I would tell you is that there is a big difference between the two organizations. EB5IC has typically been made up by members that are largely East Coast based. A lot of them are bigger city companies, a lot of real estate developers who have taken an interest in the program and who have built some success for themselves within the program. As where IIUSA is kind of, what I would tell you, it's a little bit more scattered. Its membership is all over the country. There are some New York groups. There's some groups in smaller cities. There are some groups that want to see the program work for rural locations or truly underserved areas. It's really kind of scattered about.
Got it. So this sort of, what are the outstanding issues? You've made it clear that there's these two groups that are sort of jostling. What are the issues that they're jostling about?
Yeah. So with IIUSA, and I can speak not speak for IIUSA, but I can speak to some of the things that IIUSA has done. Pat Hogan, CMB's CEO and founder, is the longest serving board member of IIUSA. And as a company, we've stayed very involved with IIUSA. And we've looked at this in a very kind of simplistic way. We know that the lawmakers want to see certain improvements to the program, namely integrity measures that will try and root out bad actors, create some more disclosure within the program, and prevent certain fraudulent actions from happening in the future. All of those things we think are good for the program. But we also know that the program needs an overhaul in terms of issues related to visa backlogs, and the investment amounts, the TEAs have always been controversial, and we need to come up with something that works for all parts of the country, not just the urban areas in New York City and things of that nature. IIUSA is taking a little bit more of a conservative approach and saying, okay, let's work with the senators, let's work with the lawmakers, and let's try and come up with something that we think is approvable, something that we think that they will go along with, that will allow the program to stay authorized or get reauthorized. In contrast to that, EB5 Investor Coalition, although that they're on board with many of the reforms that the senators want to make, many of the integrity measures, there are things that the Investor Coalition has wanted to see differently. For instance, they want to see TEAs open up to allow projects in New York City really qualify. They want to make sure that visa relief is in this bill. They want to make sure that those things get included in this bill. And they want to do different things. They want to make sure that the investment amounts, the differentials in the investment amounts make sense such that their projects that might not be in areas that qualify still have a chance at being able to raise capital. There are a few core differences in between what we want to see happen. And what I would tell you is really what it all speaks to is we at IIUSA, or not speaking for IIUSA, but what we've seen is that IIUSA wants to make sure that, has always wanted to make sure that this is a program that stays authorized. There's a lot of investors from around the world counting on this program. So we wanted to be careful not to push for reforms or not to push for adjustments in this bill that would, immediately draw concern from lawmakers. Pushing for more visas, pushing for widespread visa relief or quota-free visa categories, things like that. The lawmakers have always told us that those things are extremely controversial and are likely to kill the bill. And so although EB5 Investor Coalition thinks that those things are achievable, we've taken a bit more of a conservative approach in wanting to make sure that we can just keep this program authorized.
Because currently it's unauthorized, and we were talking before we started, a lot of investors who have filed I-526s, which is the first form you file when you're doing a EB5, and in other parts of the process are, very anxious, right?
Absolutely. One of the things that we've said, and we got very, very close in June, the very end of June, the Grassley bill, as it's been commonly referred to, including his integrity measures, some adjustments related to processing and things like that may have been good for the program. That bill was actually put up for unanimous consent on the Senate floor. And unfortunately, it was blocked by a member of the Senate that a lot of people believed was influenced by members from EB5 Investor Coalition, because it didn't include the things that EB5 Investor Coalition thought were important. And we've always seen that as playing a very dangerous game. And frankly, it's led to where we are right now. The program has lapsed. And as an industry, we're working hard, but it's going to be a tough uphill climb to make sure that we can get everything that we all want into a bill, and we can get the lawmakers to go along with it.
Okay, great. So how does all of this fit together? When do you see sort of reauthorization being likely?
Yeah. So right now, the effort is to try and get that done before the end of September. So, roughly 40, 45 days from now, a little less than that, actually. The effort is to try and work with both sides, for everyone in the industry to try and come together on some sort of compromise that would still keep the core foundations of that Grassley bill, his integrity measures that he wanted, but then also include some of the things that the EB5 Investor Coalition saw as incredibly important. I don't know that we'll get all of the things that both sides want, but that's compromise. It's trying to come together and find something that works as best as possible for both parties, but that can still be supported by the various lawmakers. And so right now the effort is to try and do that by September 30th. And I think that it's possible to do it. I think the goal is to try and get something done that can be attached to a budget resolution or a continuing resolution at that time in which the government is forced to kind of rework the budget for the next fiscal year. So that's our goal, September 30th, and I'm confident that we'll get something done before then.
And then when September 30th comes about, we hear there's a lot of speculation in the market right now as to, let's talk about pricing to begin with, right? There's a lot of speculation in the market as to, if reauthorization comes, is the amount going to go back to 900,000 straight away? Is there going to be a short space of time when perhaps they go through the rulemaking process when it's still at $500,000? You hear of other amounts, 750,000 is another amount that pops up too. Where do you see the pricing?
Yeah, so there's a few different things to consider when we're talking about pricing. If the program were to be reauthorized today, just as it was before, no changes, just a change of the date to say the program is back and reauthorized. Today, the price would be $500,000 would be the minimum investment. 1 million on the high end, 500,000 if you're in a rural or targeted employment area. The price went up briefly in November of 2019 when the USCIS passed regulations to increase the investment amounts and reform TEAs in various parts of the program. Those regulations were overturned just before the sunset date. So I believe it was June 22nd. There was a court decision in California that reversed those regulations and ruled them invalid. And so the price went back down to 500,000. If the program was reauthorized today, that's where it would be. Now, if the program were reauthorized today at 500,000, my bet would be that USCIS would push to try and reinstate those regulations and go through the proper course to make those a legal, go through the proper legal process to make sure that those regulations would remain valid. However long that could take, that becomes the great mystery. The USCIS has voiced their interest in doing that. In fact, acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has actually already ratified those regs. And just recently, they posted to the Federal Register that ratification. So it shows that USCIS, if the program were reauthorized as is, would probably take those steps. I think what most people expect to see right now is for the industry and the lawmakers to reach compromise on what those investment levels should be today. So if we see a new bill passed, whether it be a revised version of the Grassley bill or a brand new bill, I would expect to see new investment levels created and then a new process by which those investment levels may be increased over the years. And Mark mentioned 750. I think a lot of people in the industry are seeing 700, 750, somewhere in that area as being what would be reasonable for that lower investment criteria. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a lot of people that want to see that delta between the low investment and then the full investment reduced a little bit, such that if your project doesn't qualify, it doesn't render your project totally infeasible. You may be able to overcome that by just having an absolutely killer project in a fantastic real estate market. And I think people still want to see those projects get built. Right now, if the investment were to be double to go into those areas, it makes those projects difficult. So I think, Mark, I think if it gets reauthorized today, we will have a short window of 500,000. If it gets reauthorized as is, no changes, we'll have a short window. And I think there'll be huge demand for people to get in at that $500,000 investment level before the USCIS could take action.
You're the second oldest regional center. You've done many, many projects. You've got huge database of potential clients. Are you seeing a lot of interest from people potentially at that level?
We are. So, we had this very brief period, about a week at the end of June, when that court decision was made, and then before the program sunset. And there was huge demand all over the industry of people wanting to get in at that $500,000 investment level. At that point in time, it had come down from 900,000. 900,000 was very difficult for people. When you think of challenges in transferring money outside of countries, and then just $900,000 is a lot of money. It's very difficult to attain that amount of wealth, let alone have that amount of wealth liquid to make an EB5 investment. So there is growing demand right now with people who are kind of hedging their bets and making preparations such that if the program does come back as is, that they'll be able to take advantage of that $500,000 investment level.
Got it. So if you were an investor right now and you were saying, well, I want to do EB5, I'm not quite sure what to do. Like, do I file now using this direct program because I know I'm paying $500,000? Do I wait for the regional center program, or do I scout around for a direct project, and then if I don't find one I don't like, sort of see what happens? What's my best strategy? What's my best plan?
Here, I guess this is what I would tell investors. If you're confident that you want to do EB5, start your process now. One of the first things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find a qualified immigration attorney and start working on your source of funds documentation to make sure that the investment capital that you're going to use for this investment is going to work, is going to be is going to be from a lawful source, that it's going to be transferred into the country in a lawful way. And sometimes that documentation process takes time. So I would start that process now. Mark's mentioning, would you look at direct projects right now? Would you just wait for the regional center program? There's kind of, you know, we're of the belief that you should do due diligence as best as you possibly can. We don't have a problem with our investors coming to us and comparing us to multiple projects that are out there and asking us questions and things like that. We encourage our investors to do their due diligence. And that would right now also include the direct program.
Right.
But what I would tell you is that, you know, the direct program, there are very few opportunities available in the direct program right now because it's not easily converted. You know, there's not an easy conversion between the regional center model and the direct model. And we've seen companies try and do this, where they'll just slap something together. They'll take something that was originally a regional center project and try and adjust the structuring to make it work for direct. And it's not that easy. It is complicated, and there are severe limitations. And if it's not done right, the investor is going to lose out.
I mean, I would just like to agree with that. We've got a lot of clients coming to our firm who have found some of these direct projects. I would say not 10 out of 10, but 8 out of 10 of them are seriously flawed. Yeah. The way that they're put together. It just looks like a regional center who's desperate to come up with a project they can sell right now. Yeah. And it's just, it's either they're using lawyers who are not familiar with direct EB5, or they're just trying to slap something together as quickly as they can. Yeah. So, you know, if you're an investor, please, you know, if you look at one of these direct projects, just have it reviewed by someone who really understands how direct works. Because there are a couple of them in the market that work and are well thought out and put together. But I would say 8 out of 10 of the ones I've seen brought to our firm don't. And there are significant sort of risks. It's not guaranteed failure, but there are significant risks. And it's, in my opinion, extremely likely that USCIS are going to ask questions in those cases. There could be significant issues. Do you agree?
I do agree. And I'd say a couple other things about the direct program too. You know, when you want to structure a project for the direct program, you have to go all in and knowing how you're going to structure it ahead of time. You got to be careful in how you structure it. And then an investor who goes into a direct project also has to realize that it is very difficult to create 10 full-time jobs and run a business with just that $500,000 investment. I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of people saying, well, wait a minute, the price right now is $500,000. If I hurry up and do a direct program, I'll get in at $500,000. But bear in mind the likelihood that you won't have to put additional capital in to keep that business running or to continue to maintain your staff and hire those 10 and maintain those 10 full-time jobs. It's very low. The likelihood is it's very high that you're gonna have to put more capital into it. So if you're looking at it and you're saying, hey, the regional center program might come back at 700 or 750 or even at 900, but I'd rather do this at 5, bear in mind that the likelihood that you're probably going to start to close that gap with the additional capital that you need to keep that business afloat is very likely. You're probably going to have to put more money into it.
Very common with investors doing their own, because with direct, you can do your own project. And one of the issues with that is then you have, one of the big differences for me between direct and regional center is surety of your green card, because with a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of direct cases, they're investing in their own operational business. Here's what a regional center gets to do with that job creation model Matt was talking about. They get to say, basically, if the money's been spent properly, the jobs have been created, so you don't kind of care almost if the project comes to an end because the money's spent and the jobs are created. Direct can't do that. If you have, for example, I don't know, a rubber tire factory here in Dallas somewhere, and for whatever reason, after 1 year after you get your green card, that business unfortunately ceases, that's the end of your, because the jobs have to be maintained, that is the end of your, green card. So to me, but not every direct case is an operating company. You know, it is possible to structure some of the regional center product in a direct way. There are various restrictions. So for example, it's not clear to me under the law why you have to have 100% owned subsidiaries, but that's certainly the rule that USCIS applies in a direct context, not applied in a regional center context. So that's just an example of one of the things Matt was talking about, as there's lots of intricacies in doing this properly. But
the other thing I would add to it is what we're seeing is, and I get email alerts from different companies marketing their direct projects. I hear about them because we have investors who were considering our projects before the regional center program lapsed, and they say, what do you think about this project? And a lot of them are in restaurants, or they're in, other small businesses that to me seem very susceptible to the current economic environment in the United States. And if COVID numbers start to rise again, which they are, unfortunately here in Dallas as well, that some of these businesses could be impacted by COVID again.
Right.
And what Mark was mentioning, the biggest differences between the regional center program and the direct program is that with the regional center program, when the money is spent, the jobs are created, and if it never opens its doors, likelihood is you're still going to get your green card. You may not get your money back in that scenario, but you're going to get your green card. When you look at the direct program, those two things are intertwined more times than not. If that business is not going to be viable, if you're not going to be able to staff it, there's huge staffing concerns across the United States right now for things like restaurants and small businesses like that. If you can't properly staff it, you're going to probably lose your green card and your money. And this is where I see the EB5 program, the direct program rather, bearing a little bit more risk than the regional center program. Oh. And it just might be worth the wait to see the regional center program come back.
We, as a law firm, I can't comment on like financial probabilities of failure, but what we can comment on is structure and legal rights. What are your rights? What's the structure if something doesn't go quite right? And if you're basically dealing with, a large construction, and you're dealing with sort of the debt structuring type of deal that you see in the regional center side, then it's possible to it's not so much to do with the green card, but it's possible to create rights for investors, legal rights for investors that may protect you in the event of a downside. A downside could be 9/11, it could be COVID, it could be, I don't know, COVID-6 that happens next year. But it's possible to put structure into something that does things like might give you access to collateral. It's possible to, for example, it's easier to put subordination rights into a regional center deal. So if you start to get into, I think, proper technical structuring, because regional center projects tend to be much larger, and because of especially that 100% subsidiary rule I was talking about, it's a little bit easier in a good project, I think, to structure things to give you, I won't say less chance of failure because that's a financial issue, but to put legal rights into something that might put you in a slightly better position in the event of a financial knock, such as 9/11 or COVID, as we've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of things that you can do ahead of time when it comes to structuring the regional center program, especially the way in which CMB does it. We have a loan model. We can do a lot of due diligence on that developer and that project. And we can also mitigate some of those risks through proper structuring and collateralization, and then give ourselves some rights to solve problems.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I've been meeting with regional centers for almost 10 years now, and I've seen a lot of them. We always go to the headquarters, and CMB and some others, you have a full team of people. You have economists, you have lawyers, you have people to take care. You have people who properly administer the escrow accounts. Right. And there's been a couple of disasters in EB5 because the regional center concern really doesn't have the experienced personnel who know how to operate an escrow account.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we have that built in. We have about 50 employees here in our office in Dallas, and then also our original office back in Rock Island. And all day, every day, we have construction compliance people, we have financial compliance people, we have people that visit these sites, we have teams of people that are reviewing these projects. Right. And we can identify risks before they occur, or before problems occur rather. We can jump right on solving problems if they occur. COVID, I won't lie to you, COVID presented challenges that no one ever expected to see. And so having the team that we have in place and the resources that we have to be able to solve for some of those has really been able to help our investors. And, if you got to think about it in contrast to two things, really. Investing with a smaller regional center that doesn't have those resources can leave you limited. And then also investing in the direct program. They're very often very small businesses that are not going to have those resources. Or it might be you taking those on, and you may not really be interested in having to deal with those problems. I don't know every investor situation, but every investor situation is different. And sometimes people, they don't want to come to the United States and want to run a small business. They want to run their business back home and avail the U.S. to their children or the rest of their family members.
Another difference between direct and regional center is, I think in theory under the law, there is no difference between direct and regional center in terms of under the Immigration and Nationality Act, in terms of your responsibility for participating in the business. But as a practical level, it's certainly USCIS absolutely do seem to require more participation in a regional center, and in a direct EB5 filing. And even if you structure things the same, they still ask questions in it that they just do. They just require more direct participation. So when I think, Matt, about students, right? A lot of our clients are filing EB5 for their kids who are students. That's always worked very well with a regional center model. But when USCIS, I think improperly, but they still do it. And you listen, you don't want to file a case and within mindset you're going to have to litigate against USCIS for years in federal court.
It's a bad way to start.
Yeah, even if you win, it's a loss. So, if you have a kid, really in college, structuring something so they have a little bit more participation in the business might not be the ideal.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people that we see that use the regional center program, you might have one spouse that's actively involved in their existing business and one that, is a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, or you might have children that are just wanting to go to the United States, but the parents aren't really interested in immigrating to the United States, so they might gift the funds to their children. That really works well in the regional center program. Probably doesn't work so well in the direct program. So here's what I would say on this whole topic. I would just leave you with, if you're going to consider the direct program, you really have to do your due diligence, especially if you're signing on to get involved in somebody else's structured project, which is really the opportunities that we're seeing out there right now. And when it comes to our projects, we'd encourage people to still do their due diligence. We had active offerings available at the point in time in which the program lapsed, and we're staying on our toes to continue to adjust those, make sure that they're going to comply with whatever new laws come back. And so we have been continuing to send out our offering documents to clients, letting them know that they can do all of their due diligence. They can ask us questions. They can even visit our project sites. They just won't be able to fully subscribe to that offering and file their petition until the regional center program comes back.
Sure.
But it gives them a head start, because if the program comes back as is, I think there is going to be big demand until the price increases. And even if the program comes back with an increase, maybe to 700 or 750,000, there might be other protections in that program or new provisions in that program that make it really attractive. And if you already have a leg up on doing due diligence and you've already been able to pick the project that you want and take that time, and you've taken that time to do your due diligence and get comfortable, that could be invaluable when the program comes back.
So I think I can see two issues with this. One issue is, if when the program comes back, we don't know how short or long the 500,000 window might or might not be.
That's right.
And if it's going to take you a month to do your source of funds, you might be out of luck. So I think it makes sense to have your source of funds ready,
Absolutely.
Right, to go.
I'd recommend that anybody who's really interested, they start working with their attorney right now. They start trying to gather that information so that they're completely ready. A lot of people will even want to move funds into the United States, into their own escrow or into a project escrow. There's things like that you can even do to get prepared, and just make sure that you've checked all of those boxes before the program comes back. Because if the program comes back as is and it stays at 500,000, I think that we're going to see a huge rush of investors trying to get in before anything can happen to change it.
And then, Matt, projects you have that for whatever reason the market views as very strong projects.
Right.
I know you feel all your projects are good, but let's say there's one that the market feels is particularly strong.
Yeah.
I think reality is those sell out particularly fast, right?
They do. And so, we've got a couple of projects, and, since COVID and really before COVID, we've been working with a great developer relationship. They're based here in Dallas. They're Hillwood Development Company. And we take on a lot of industrial logistics projects with Hillwood. It's one of the fastest growing industry sectors. And not just any industrial logistics projects, the projects that we have on the market right now, and this is publicly available information, they're actually pre-leased by Amazon.com. So they have long-term leases in place. And you look at the likelihood that those buildings are going to be built on time and on budget. You look at the likelihood that those jobs are going to be created through that spending. And then also the economic viability of those projects is very strong.
When you say pre-leased, perhaps for some people you can explain what that means.
Yeah, it means that they already have a long-term lease agreement signed with that tenant and in place. And so, you think of it, I had a colleague of mine that drew this analogy, and she had said, it's kind of like going out to the market with a hotel project, but that hotel is going to be fully booked for the next 20 years into the future. If you had the opportunity to invest into that hotel that was fully booked for the next 20 years, you'd probably say that's a pretty great project. Well, that's exactly what you have in one of these industrial logistics centers that is fully pre-leased by a, Fortune 500 company, number 2 on the Fortune 500 list in Amazon's case. The creditworthiness of Amazon to be able to pay those lease payments and for that to create value that will be interesting for a long-term holder, a buyer to come in and buy that asset is pretty good.
So I think this is, it's interesting to think about this in the context of repayment, because I can think of clients who you talk about these issues to, and then they say, well, I spoke to this project and it's okay because they're going to repay me by refinancing. So Matt, you're a commercial guy. That's what you do. Imagine there's a big building that's built, and let's say it's an apartment building, and let's say for whatever reason, they can't rent any of the apartments, they can't sell them. Are they going to be able to refinance that?
Yeah, so look, it's really simple. If it's not generating revenue and they don't have strong net operating income, they're not going to have the value that they need to be able to refinance that asset and take out the EB5 loan, or to be attractive enough for a buyer to come in and buy that asset. And so, look, we've been very fortunate in the multifamily sector. We have some projects here in Dallas that have been absolutely fantastic. We actually just had a project complete a recapitalization and repay. Our Group 56 project in Atlanta just repaid just this last Friday. So huge accomplishment. But not everyone has been so fortunate. There's been moratoriums on evictions. And so there's been a lot of people that just, when they heard that they couldn't be evicted, stopped paying their rent. And it's created turmoil in the housing industry in various parts of the United States. And in, project by project, it's an issue. And so if you can't keep your building leased and it can't generate revenue, or, regardless of the asset, if you're not generating revenue, you're not going to drive that value.
I think what you're saying is obvious, right? If I'm a bank and I'm lending money, why would I lend money to an empty building that's just hemorrhaging cash for operating? How am I going to get my loan repaid? It's never going to happen.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So thanks for that. So perhaps we can conclude with thoughts about, if I'm two different investors, right? If I'm an investor thinking about EB5, you talked a little about this before, but what should I do to pursue this? And then secondly, if I'm an existing investor and I'm concerned about all of this political wrangling, what can I do as an individual to try and make a difference?
Yeah, so 2 great questions. The first one I did touch on, and I think I'd start right now. I'd work to find the best attorney possible. CMB works with a lot of great attorneys, including Mark here, that have been able to help people throughout their process. I would pick my attorney. I would start doing I'd get my own house in order. I'd start working on my own source of funds information, my own personal information that's going to allow me to move quickly. And then I would start looking at projects. I'd start trying to narrow those down. The regional centers, especially and I can speak to CMB, not all regional centers, but we're fully staffed. We haven't laid people off. We haven't, we've actually hired people since the start of COVID. We had 2 new people start in July. And so it tells you that we're very confident that the program's going to come back and it's going to be very strong. But we have plenty of people here that can be able to talk to you. We have investors or investor relation managers in-house that collectively speak 14 different languages. So we can connect with you most likely in your native tongue and help you throughout that process. And we've got time to do it. As I mentioned, we think it might be late September when the program comes back. So now is the time to really dig in. You're going to get a lot of attention from these groups that want to be able to answer your questions. And if they're not giving you attention, that should be a huge red flag. So I'd start that process now and be prepared for anything that could happen. Ask the questions about what's happening, what's going on with legislation. Groups like CMB are going to be able to help you answer those or help give you some answers and some insight into those things. And then, you know, the other side of it is, you know, we want our investors to be educated. We want them to be prepared. We want them to be comfortable with what they're going into. And so we don't want people just rushing to us at the very end, you know, not sure what they're getting into. That's not a great way to start that relationship. We'll accommodate, you know, of course we'll accommodate people in any situation, but, you know, I think it always creates a better relationship when the investors are really comfortable with the group that they're working with. And then your second question, Mark, remind me again, I think
if I'm an existing investor and I'm concerned about all of the political wranglings, I just want the program back. So my case is going to get pursued. Yeah. What can I do as an individual?
You know, I think right now is the time to be putting pressure on the industry. As I mentioned, there are two groups, and then you have the lawmakers and you have the USCIS. And all of these people that are actively involved in this legislation, they're all going to have a little bit of a say in it. And I think right now it's really important for the existing investors to kind of stay inquisitive. What's happening? What's going on? You know, let your story be heard. You know, write to the various regional centers that can share your story. We would love to see that. We would love to hear our investors, you know, write us something that we can share with the lawmakers to talk about their story, humanize the story for them. We know that there's another organization out there, the AIIA, I think it's American Immigration Investor Alliance. And I think that that's a huge part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the word out there that these are real people. They're really in limbo right now. They need the industry to come together. But I think more than ever, I'd be talking to those two biggest stakeholder organizations, IIUSA and EB5IC, and making sure that they understand that at the end of the day.
So how do I do that?
Sure, reach out directly to them.
How? How do I get their information?
You can go to their websites. They have ways in which you can connect with them on social media, Twitter, on Facebook, on different platforms like that. I know IIUSA also has an event in October. Hopefully the program's back by then. But these groups are involved. They regularly have you know, webinars and things of that nature where you can listen to those and ask questions. But I think I'd reach out to these groups and I'd be telling them, you know, right now it's the time to compromise. You know, there's great things that can be accomplished in this bill if the two sides come together, and there's great things that can be accomplished by EB5. Everybody knows that. The whole world knows that. And so it's making sure that those two sides understand that there's a human element to this, that there's people on the other side of that equation that are dependent upon this program getting reauthorized. And if I'm an investor and I'm in limbo right now, I think that's what I'm doing. I'm talking to those groups, making sure that my story is heard, making sure that they understand that, you know, shiny objects like, you know, set aside visas for brand new investors, shiny objects like, you know, this broad TEA criteria or things like that that might be controversial to the lawmakers, might be time to get past some of those things right now. And it might be time to start thinking about what can get this program reauthorized. So that's where I leave it.
Well, thanks,
I think just on that one, Matt, just a quick couple of questions that we've had come in. So we've obviously got some worried investors on the line still. And even with those words that you've just said, if the program isn't reauthorized for whatever reason, how is that going to impact people that are still going through the process currently?
Yeah. So right now, the USCIS has put out a statement that they're not processing I-526s. They're not processing new 924 petitions. So if you already have a 526 petition approved, I don't think the State Department is issuing visas right now either. So really the only petitions that are being processed are 829 petitions for investors who have already received their conditional visa. And so right now they're truly in limbo. When I say that, it means that they've got petitions on file that are just sitting there. And we believe the USCIS is going to continue to hold those petitions. We don't expect the USCIS to start denying those petitions anytime soon. They know that the industry is still working with the lawmakers to bring this program back. And so I think that there's going to be, you know, a pretty long leash there to make sure that that opportunity can occur. And so, you know, for the existing investors, though, let's talk about worst case scenarios. Worst case scenario, if the program never comes back and this whole thing just goes on for years, and it's, you know, I'm not sure what exactly will happen.
They'll have to do something. There'll have to be some relief.
And
I mean, it's so grossly unfair.
I think that that's it. You know, if we've talked about that multiple times, and, you know, I shouldn't say I'm not sure. What I expect to see happen is I expect to see the industry and the lawmakers come together on some sort of a way for there to be an orderly winding down of the program for investors who have already filed petitions to be able to continue through the process. Now, there was in early 2021, there was a webinar that was put on where I think that there was a bit of fear mongering going on in the industry. And there were people that were very concerned coming out of this webinar that, hey, if program sunsets, they're immediately just going to start denying petitions. Why would I move forward? Why would I have any faith in the program? And I couldn't see that as further from reality. I think that there is going to be an appetite to allow those people to continue through the process. So, but when I say I'm not really sure, I mean, I don't know when, I don't know how long.
But that's fair, Matt, because nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
You're talking
Crystal
about
ball
a future
scenario.
vote of Congress.
Yeah.
Who knows which congressman is how he's going to actually vote on the actual day.
Yeah, that's
Nobody knows
exactly
that.
right.
So, someone might feel very comfortable and very certain.
Yeah.
But to me, the person who says they know is the person who either is a fool or is not being completely honest, right?
Yeah. And I think it's when I've heard people say, here's exactly what's going to happen, I sometimes feel it's a combination of both. I think that there's not many people who know exactly what's going to happen. So.
Yeah, at least not on this planet Earth,
yeah,
right?
Maybe planet Earth. Yep.
So anyway, Scott, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, just one further question. So we've got a client here that says that they have invested 500K. So if the amount does go back up to 900,000, is that going to have any impact on those that have already filed at the $500,000?
Yeah, so this is a question that we get a lot. And, the USCIS, that ruling came down to repeal those regulations and send the price back down to 500,000. That happened at the end of June 22nd. And so they had a certain appeal process. And I believe we're reaching the end of that appeal process if it hasn't already been reached. And so that to me would seem to be the only, really realistic way in which the original decision of that court would be invalidated and the regs would go back.
Right, because that's what it would require, right? It's going to require the court decision to be held to be invalid. That means there has to be an appeal.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, I was wrong. I thought USCIS would start to move to appeal that decision pretty quickly, but they didn't. And seems to me it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to persuade a judge to do something.
Yeah, I think that there's precedent that shows that was probably the right decision made. I think we saw those regs as important to the industry. We were able to take on projects on both sides of the regulations and have success. But certainly there's a stronger appetite for investors to invest at that lower dollar amount. But you're right, Mark. I thought too, we would have seen the USCIS move more quickly to either appeal that or start the process to reinstate those regs. Because that's really the other way that they could send the price back to 900,000 is they could go through the process to reinstate those regs. Now, it's unlikely that we would ever see something that would try and reinstate those regs retroactively. There's not much precedent to show that that's something that the USCIS would be interested in doing or would have much success in doing. And they've actually already issued a statement that has said that they're going to honor the petitions filed after that date while they consider their options. And when we assumed considering their options, we thought that meant appeal.
So a long-winded
appeal,
answer to the question is, if someone's filed at $500,000, they're probably okay.
Yeah, I mean that's the way we see it. If they filed at 500,000, likelihood is that they're going to be adjudicated at 500,000. We don't see a real obvious situation here that is going to send it back to 900,000 retroactively.
Gotcha. Scott?
Yeah, just one final one. This is more from a direct point of view, Mark, so probably one for you here. So client here is a licensed veterinarian working in Canada. They want to invest in a veterinary hospital in the States, and is this possible for EB5?
Yes, it is. So you're talking about medical setups. Couple of things to remember. We've done these before, more commonly done with dental clinics and certain practices for physicians, but veterinarians certainly possible. Remember a few things. One, you have to create 10 actual new jobs, right? So you can't just invest in an existing veterinarian practice. You've got to create 10 actual new jobs. The other issue that we come up with all the time, and I don't want to say we're experts in it, but we've done a lot of cases. Probably, I can't imagine anyone's done the number of direct cases we've done involving this issue, which is medical licensing. So here's the thing. Once you get into dentistry, physicians, veterinarians, you can run into another issue. If a foreign investor wants to acquire, let's say, you know, a couple of veterinary hospitals, you have to look at what are the license requirements in a particular state. In some states, you'll find that's completely fine. You can go ahead and do that. In other states, to own a business that employs physicians, veterinarians, dentists, you are required to have a veterinary license or a dental license. That does vary by state to state, so a generic answer can't be given. But that's sort of the little issue. So generally, the answer to the question is yes, but there's a couple of issues. Now, there's always a solution to issues. So if you're talking about the licensing issue, one solution we've employed is to create two separate companies. So if you imagine that there's like a practice, they have their medical equipment, they have a lease, they have a building, maybe there's two of those locations. That's owned by company A. And then company B is the company that employs the veterinarians, and that's a completely separate company. So the investor, if they're not licensed veterinarian in a particular state, then invests in company A, which is the company that owns the facilities and the equipment, and they can be an equity holder in that. They can run it, they can control it, and then they have nothing to do really with company B, who leases the facilities from them. That's not going to be the solution to everyone. I'm just saying that because, having said there are issues, I want to show you an example of how the issues can be resolved and you can move forward with that. So the answer is yes, but you really need to talk to someone who's done businesses involving medical licensing before, because especially in New York and California, there are rules and regulations that we have to navigate in structuring that properly.